On behalf of the Jesuit clergy, the staff, and the parishioners of St. Mary's Student Parish, I welcome you. My name is Anne Marie Ballou, and I'm a proud member of the St. Mary's Student Parish Anti-Racist Work Group. In essence, our group endeavors to help people understand that racism is a sin. We further work to promote a more loving and just society for all people, but especially people of color. As people of faith, we all know that God's law is that we love one another and treat each other with dignity and respect. Yet we violate this law. Sometimes we don't know when or how we violate this commandment. In pursuit of our own interest, if we are white, we're unaware of how unloving our actions can be and the deleterious impact that that can have on our sisters and brothers of color. Our speaker for this evening can help us with these issues, which have been keeping me awake for something like 50 years, so I hope he helps a lot. He has worked for an energy company called DTE, you've probably heard of it, and the Archdiocese of Detroit. Currently, he is the executive director of the Detroit Catholic Pastoral Alliance, which works to improve and enhance the lives of the citizens of Detroit and its surrounds. I want to repeat where he works at. It is called Detroit Catholic Pastoral Alliance. Remember that and/or write it down and Google it. You will be awed by the number of activities and endeavors that this man oversees. I've had the privilege and pleasure of hearing tonight's speaker on 2 prior occasions. Each time he's been dynamic, passionate, he wraps his message in love, and he injects some humor. Ladies and gentlemen, people of faith, children of God, please welcome Mr. John Thorne.
I'm glad you're clapping now because I may not get invited back. I had a directed a choir I still direct that choir. Look at that. Hey, it's Courtney Bond. They're from that choir, from the Black Catholic Ministries Gospel Choir from Detroit. But we went out to Shelby Township and we were doing this presentation, and I had some friends who came and they were scared for their lives. They said, "What made you go there on this evening? And you went all the way back to Africa and brought us all the way through the Middle Passage to tell the story of music, and you could have just sang." And I said, you know, everything has to be in context. And so this evening, hopefully I won't offend, but also give a chance to educate. As I said, my name is John Thorne, and I am the last love child of John N. and Frida F. Thorne, and my mother's here this evening. And so, hey, Mom. I always say that the last child is the best child, so we won't remember anything about my sister. No, but what I found is that even in my own life's experience, that every piece of my life has been connected to the piece that was before it. And so I am the grandchild of Gretna and Joseph, the grandchild of Dorothy and Wallace. Yet then if we look back 4 more generations, we find a man named Tobias Henson. And Tobias Henson was a slave right in the metropolitan area of Washington, D.C. at the time. And there the journey of his life began as a sharecropper. And he himself was freed from slavery, but his wife and his child was not. And the agreement upon the death of the master was that he could buy their freedom. And not only did he buy that freedom, but he started to work the land that was all around him. And that land became part of his land. And today that piece of land is the most prized possession in all of Washington, D.C. It's where the Catholic Church of our family began as they built that parish there, and now the Josephites run the parish. But the piece of land that the church sits on looks over all of Washington, D.C. And so much so that they built a banquet hall called the Panorama Room, and the whole wall is glass, and it looks over D.C. And so every time we have an opportunity to go back to D.C., it's going back home. And that's where I find that no matter where I travel in the world, I always find myself at home. And so this evening, I wanted to take a moment to thank Father Jim and Anne Marie for sure for the invitation, for extending it. And my former student at U of D High School, Father Bobby, I knew him as the hockey great, Bobby Carly. And so just a wonderful opportunity to connect back with people. One of the things that I hope to do this evening is, as we look at what it means to be all are welcome, but what the challenge also is for us as church today. And I know everybody's not Catholic, that's fine. But there's still some intimate things that happen in the midst of our relationships with one another that continuously guides our progress as a people, our vision of who we want to be as church. And so I hope that we will be able to surface those, that you will ask questions of those, that I'll be able to help answer those. And if there's something I don't answer, I'm not gonna make it up tonight. My mother told me, you always can make up a great story. But I must preface to say this evening that I am not speaking on behalf of the Archdiocese of Detroit. I'm not speaking on behalf of the USCCB, because they did not bring me this evening. But I'm speaking on behalf of someone who was Black Catholic born and Black Catholic bred, and I know one day I'll be Black Catholic dead. But as one who also has worked in ministries and schools and parishes, on the street, in the diocesan level. And so I hope that the things that I share this evening will resonate within your heart, will all help us to glean the best from our own lived experience, but also put us on a path to where we want to go. Now, I don't know about for you, but for me, the last 2 years have been rough. It's rough teaching in the school. It's rough teaching in the school on Zoom while you have COVID and you have 104-degree temperature for 5 days, yet you crawl down to the computer to give your kids the best that you can give. It was a rough time for our country because it showed not only the frailty of our lives, as many have had COVID, many have passed for COVID, many have survived COVID, but it also showed us just how fragile the relationships are in this country. It exposed something that we knew was always there, but in a whole nother light. The frailty of the original sin of this country, racism. Just like many of you, I was at home that day when I was sitting there watching TV or doing something, and I saw for the first time the murder of George Floyd. And in those days that followed, millions of people took to the streets proclaiming Black Lives Matter. Yet I was wanting more. I wondered what was really going on in the church where we couldn't say Black Lives Matter. We find that my pastor at 90 years old decided that he was going to hang a sign right in the sanctuary and on the pulpit that said, Black Lives Matter. Sometimes our fear paralyzes us, our fear of the unknown, yet we as a church have always taught the human dignity of the person. We issued a statement, our bishops, and in that statement, we talked about all of the people the various groups that we have dedicated to the Native American, the African American community, the Euro American community. Yet we believe that all lives matter, but we could not stand and proclaim that Black lives matter. Now, this evening's talk, I have no idea where this title came from. Now, Anne-Marie called me and she said, hey, I need a title. I said, no problem. And then time went by and I was doing lots of other things. We're running a capital campaign and she's like, hey, you said you were gonna give it to me by today. And I said, got you. All are welcome, but are they? She said, oh, okay. And then when I hung up the phone, I was like, yeah, that's a good one. Thank you, God. And then as I started preparing, I said, what was I thinking? But here we are. Marty Hogan, a wonderful liturgist within the church, and you know his music has flooded all of our Catholic hymn books for years, wrote a song that said, all are welcome. Now I know that everyone's not a singer, and I'm not gonna sing this evening, but we are gonna say that I am gonna say these words. Because I think these words are so key, because it puts us in a mode not only of where we are, but where we hope to be. Yet still, I have a problem with the words. The words say, let us build a house where love can dwell, where all can safely live, a place where saints and children tell how hearts learn to forgive. Built of hopes and dreams and visions, rock of faith and vault of grace. Here the love of Christ shall end divisions. All are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place. I think the words are beautiful. But I was told by my very first music teacher that you cannot sing what you don't believe. He said, if music is really going to take hold within your life, you have to be about what you sing about. At the time, I was young and I had no idea what he was talking about. And I was like, okay, sure. So I would look at the song and I'm like, I don't know what that is. Oh, and that's in Latin. I really don't know that. So I don't care anything about it. Just pass it on by. But what I've come to find is that we have to be and live what we sing about. As a musician, I have to sing because if I don't believe it, how can I help someone else to believe and understand? Now, as the music director at my parish, while I do go to what we consider a Black Catholic parish, it's the mother church of Black Catholicism in the entire state of Michigan. Yet, our hymnody is a little different, but still, we sing a lot of songs that are in common. But this one song, I couldn't get past it. I said, how can we sing that all are welcome if we don't mean it? And somebody looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? All are welcome. I said, when the all are welcome. It's not just this vision, but it's what we have to live. And until we can challenge ourselves enough to believe what we sing, we'll never sing that at my church. Now, unfortunately, I'm not the music director anymore. And I have no idea what the new music director would do. But I always told my choir, if you can believe what you sing, then you can pass it on. For 15 years, we traveled the United States and sang in churches and anywhere else somebody would take us, parks, hospitals, everywhere we go. They never had sheet music because they had to internalize the lyrics and believe it. And then no matter if it was choral music or spirituals or gospel, they could put it back out there. Now, I won't say that I had the best singing choir in the United States. I'm sure there are thousands of choirs that are better, but nobody could outdo us because I knew when they got up there that they were going to believe every word to every song, no matter how long it took us to work on it. And that's what it's being about the Father's business for me. Now, one of the things that always captured me was the words of Jesus. In John 15, we find these words that as the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. When I really think about the basic message, it's all about love. As we look at our country's shattered past, a past that we often don't want to talk about, a past that goes back to a time where people came to this country to get away because they felt they were being persecuted, yet on this land, they found ways to persecute others. A history that reminds us that traverse on the Trail of Tears and what that really called us to. But even in my own cultural family's experience of racism and how the slave trade also affected. And in our minds, sometimes we try to calculate things and say, but they were with their families. But they weren't. Families were torn apart. People were put on boats and they came from different parts of Africa. And here we had a melting pot out, yet there was still something that bound them together. Here in America, we found a new land, a new way of living or coping. And yet it was the very basics of faith that held them together. Sometimes when you're going through, that song from Mass or that poem that you remember as a child is what gets you through. It was in those moments that you realize just how deep your faith is and how connected you are. It was the songs that were birthed out of the field and out of work that held generations upon generations of the African American community together. Those simple songs, the slave songs, the development of the Negro spiritual. Yet those spirituals in its very basic song told a whole story. But where are we as church today? Here we find ourselves thousands of years later from the time of Christ, hundreds of years later from the end of slavery. Yet there are still people who are mentally bound. There are still people who are set apart because of how they look. Yet where are we as church? I often where we would be as church if we don't challenge ourselves about who we are and who we want to be. I'm longing for a day where we can say that all are welcome, and we really mean it. And not just the African American community, but that all are welcome. We are in an amazing city. There's a beautiful mosaic of so many different people from so many different places, but how do we take time to value that in our everyday lives? In 1984, the Black bishops of the United States wrote a document called What We Have Seen and Heard. That was just a little bit. But in this document, they started to lay out a course of African-American spirituality, but also they challenged the church. That if the church is really going to be about its work in evangelization, that we must also be about the work of justice. And so the bishops wrote, "We oppose all oppression and injustice. For unless all are free, none are free. Moreover, oppression by some means freedom's destruction for both the oppressor and the oppressed. And liberation liberates the oppressor and the oppressed. When in recent years we rejected token integration for self-determination, it was not to choose confrontation in place of cooperation, but to insist on collaboration with mutual respect and dignity for everyone's unique gift. Without justice, any meaningful Without justice, any meaningful reconciliation is impossible. Justice safeguards the rights and delineates the responsibility of all. As a people, we must safeguard their own cultural identity. They must respect the cultures and values of others. For this reason, sincere reconciliation builds upon mutual recognition and mutual respect. For this is the foundation that can be erected out of authentic Christian love." You probably never heard that. Our bishops write lots of things that we don't read. Yeah, the Pope writes lots of things that we probably don't read that either. But yet it calls us to more. If we're going to say that all are welcome, this document says we have to meet everyone out of mutual love and respect. But it's also our challenge at the same time. How do we connect with people that we don't know or that we've never seen? It was once said that the most segregated hour of the week was Sunday at 11 o'clock. And not just because we're in our comfort zone, but everybody goes back and does what they do. When was the last time we had a visitor in our church and the whole church ran to greet him? We've even sectioned off ministries. "Hi, my name is John. I'm with the hospitality ministry." But wait, isn't hospitality everyone's ministry? My pastor refuses to let us have a hospitality ministry because he says we have to be the face of Christ to everyone who walks in our doors. It's a change in the mind shift for us. But that's really where we're at as church. We need something more. And the more itself has to come from ourselves. Dr. King, in his letter in the Birmingham jail, had a lot to say to the church of that time. But for me, I think it's strangely odd that the same things still are affecting the church of our time. Now, I know that many of us on this journey of becoming anti-racist or even forming an anti-racist church are on different paths. We all are starting at different levels. Some of us have found a way to extend the community in which we live because of the places we go and the people we interact with. But in order to really make it happen, we need that all are welcome. It's far less about the heady things we know in our head, or all the books that we read, or all the articles that we can read, but it's more about the action that we put into place every day. As a teacher, I can read books all day long, and it might touch my heart, but until I reach out and come across the border to meet with someone else, to talk with someone else, will anything ever change? Dr. King had these words to say. Only because it's the law. But I have longed to hear these white ministers say, follow this decree because integration is morally right and the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churches stand on the sidelines and merely mouth pious irrelevancies. And in the midst of the mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard so many ministers say, those are social issues for which the gospel has nothing to do with. And I have watched many churches commit themselves to completely otherworldly religions, which made strange distinction between bodies and souls, the sacred and the secular. But I remember a time when the church was very powerful. It was during that period that the early Christians rejoiced when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed in. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion, but it was the thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Whenever the early Christians entered a town, the power structure got disturbed and immediately sought to convict them for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. But they went on with their conviction, and they became a colony of heaven, and they obeyed God rather than man. They were small in number, but big in commitment. They were too godly intoxicated to be astronomically intimidating. But things are different now. The contemporary church is often weak and ineffectual. It has a voice with an uncertain sound. It's so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of an average community is consoled often when the church's vocal sanctions of things that they are in. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club that has no meaning for the 20th century. If there was ever a challenge for the church today, it's a challenge that's 58 years old. that we can't be too complacent, that we can't find ourselves too comfortable not to reach out, because that's the church that Jesus had envisioned. A church where it was no longer slaves, but I call you friends. A church that we envision where we can believe and say that all are welcome. How do we get there? Are you telling me that I have to be uncomfortable in order to make change? No. We like our little silos. But a great priest told me that Jesus came to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. But where are we today? How do we become this vision of the church that we want to be? How do we reach out and say all are welcome? Or as this talk is often given, the Negro is my brother. Dr. King set forth an awesome precedence for us. That even in the midst of the struggle for justice, that we have to keep working for freedom. Because freedom and justice have to go together. If there is someone who is truly free, then they are also working for justice. And if someone is really working for justice, they're looking for the freedom of all. But where does that put us today? For a parish that is diverse, how do we find out a way to reach out to those who are just beyond our doors? In so many ways, the ministries that we have formed as church over the years has done a lot of good, but it's also made us very comfortable. There was a man who hung out outside the Archdiocese of Detroit when I was working there with my friend Joyce. And his name was Frank. And Frank was, he was awesome. He didn't say a whole lot. And he would walk up to us and he would just say, I said, oh, Frank, what you want? And he was like, $1. And of course, me, I never carried cash on me. And I have no idea why. I'm one of these new modern people. If you can't use your debit card, you don't need to go there. And, but Joyce always had money. So I said, you know what? I'm going to have to start going to get money. So I have money on me. But we stood outside one day. And every day when we would walk by Frank, we would say hello. We would speak to Frank. But we stood outside and watched all of our coworkers walk by like he didn't exist. And I thought, isn't this funny? We work for the church. And so day after day, we would have these encounters with Frank. And one day, it was really cold and he wanted coffee. And he grabbed Joyce's hand and he's like, come on. And Joyce grabs me like, I don't know where he's taking us. And I was like, I don't know either. But right across the street was the Book Cadillac Hotel in downtown Detroit. And in the first floor of that hotel was Starbucks. And I said, oh no, Joyce, we're not going in there. She's like, oh, come on. Oh, no. I said, we're going to give Frank money. And she was like, no, let's go in. I was like, no, we got to give Frank money. So gave Frank money. And Frank goes in. And we go in behind him. And there we encountered the worker said, excuse me, you can't come in here. This is not a warming place. And then he takes out $10. And they said, oh, can we help you? And I thought, yes. If we're really gonna work to become church, there can't be anyone who's outside of our vision. Now, right now, in our diocese, hopefully some of my friends are on there from the Secular Franciscans, but we've been working on different plans. Because for us, the vision isn't just the parish, but it's how we also make the entire archdiocese more anti-racist. And the plan has went separate ways. We have two plans that we've offered up over time. And it looks like both plans have been rejected by the diocese. But, I'm like John Lewis. I'm always stirring up good trouble. And so we keep working. One of the things I was really hoping for in the bishop's document was that we would put it all out there so we could deal with it all. And there were pieces that were great. And I traveled around with the USCCB for 6 years, speaking on racism in their building intercultural competency for ministers. But the one thing I was waiting for was, hey, we didn't talk about privilege. Oh, well, we mentioned systematic racism in the intro, but it was never covered in the document. And I said, oh, but if we're really going to be church, we got to be honest. We got to put all of our garbage out there so we can deal with it. And so we just said, well, let's keep working. So my organization formed a group called the Change Makers. And the Change Makers wrote a threefold approach, and we sent it to the Archbishop. And what we were looking at is how to make the Archdiocese more anti-racist in three folds. One started with our seminary, Sacred Heart Major Seminary. Part two was to look at the Curia itself, the central service office of the diocese. And last, what could parishes do? And it came back to us that they thought our plan was radical. I said, oh, wonder what that means. So then I went back and I looked at the plan and I said, okay, radical. Number one, offer anti-racism training for the students of the seminary. I didn't find the radical part yet. And then the second phase was really radical, that we were going to raise $1 million to have a chair of African American studies at the seminary. Now, how we were going to raise that $1 million, that would be radical. Part two was to look at what are things that the Archdiocese could do for the staff that actually works there. And this staff goes out to all of our parishes. And so at the very heart of it, our vision was they too should have anti-racism training. Radical. And then the other thing we asked for them was to actually go and be. One of the things that I found in my life, especially when I was working for the diocese, that on the second and fourth Sunday, now I'm a terrible father because my son sang on the second Sunday, but I never went to church. Well, not mine. Mm-hmm. I went to other churches. They're like, oh, John, come sing. Oh, no. Oh, John, are you going to talk? No, I just want to be. I want to know what's going on at the very basic level with all of these parishioners. Maybe that's radical too. The third part was for the parishes. Now we know, like this parish, it's fast. You've got lots of things going on. And so, but what we would do is we would make an offer to come in and do anti-racism training for any parish that wanted. Radical, because it's 13 of us and 205 parishes. Maybe that was the radical part. But then the other thing was we said, how about we offer you a list of contractors? Right now, if you call the Archdiocese of Detroit and a parish says, hey, I need a roofer, there's not one roofer of color on that list. There's not one woodworker, not one person who does steel work. And I said, well, how did this happen? Not even the lawn services, not one. But what happens if we offer you a list to add to your list? We're not saying a parish has to use one, but we'll give you a list of qualified people who can be added to your list. And I guess that too was radical. It would be very easy for anybody to give up. But what I found is you can't change a system unless you're part of it. My friends always ask me, why do you travel around the country doing all this racism talk for your church and you're still there? Because my son is 15 years old and I want a better church for him. I want a better world for him. It was that inspired all of this. When we look at the news and we hear about all the people who have been killed and all the people who have lost their lives, struggling, still trying to find a way to find freedom and justice. They weren't all killed in what we consider this modern day time of the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement started years before. If we want to give a date, I guess I have to go back to Money, Mississippi, when a young man named Emmett Till was killed. And you say, well, how was that the start? There were people who died before him, but his mother, Mamie, decided to open up that coffin that they sent him in, that wooden box, and to display to the world just how ugly racism is. It was the first time that a Black death had really been publicized. But yet, we're still in the same way now. Church, in order to become welcoming, we're going to have to stretch. We're going to have to read. Of course, there's always some reading that happens. I loved Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. And my students are reading The Making of Black Lives Matter right now in my class. Because what I found is that the more we educate, the more we know about our history, the more we know about the ugliness and the prettiness of it, we come to realize that everyone at some point has gone through some struggle. But if we're really going to be the church that Christ meant for us to be, if we're going to really be that vision of church that our disciples and Peter had envisioned, that we were supposed to be missionary and on a journey, our journey begins at home. Our journey begins at the end of the pew with the person you don't know. Now, I know this parish is a little different from most. It's like you guys are college all over again. Because some people come to town for 4 years. Then they go back to wherever they came from or to wherever their next journey is. But how do we make sure that everyone who comes in to this place feels that they are valued and loved? When we do the very basic things of making sure that no parishioner is left behind, or no visitor goes by without being welcomed by any and everybody around them. It's when we do those simple steps that we begin to move to becoming that church where all are welcome. I worked at a parish and someone lived across the street asked, one day the doors open, and they said, why are you opening those doors? I said, what do you mean? She said, that church has been closed for about 15 years. I said, what? But sometimes when people don't see any activity, they think there's nothing going on. While she was at her church at 11 o'clock, we were at church at 11, and by the time she came home, it was a desert land. But there's something about the fellowship. And I know it happens differently in every place. At my church, they go way beyond. Before COVID, we were cooking about 200 pounds of chicken every Sunday. And I can't tell you at least 2 cases of eggs and how many pounds of grits. But the fellowship was not about feeding your stomach. It was about meeting the people who are part of your parish. And sometimes, like I said, it went way beyond. Church was over at 11:30, and at 2 o'clock, I was trying to move people out so I could close the doors. But there's something about that. There's something in valuing and understanding a community. That, of course, we know we're Catholics, and if Father goes over his 15-minute homily, we get antsy, start shaking like, oh my gosh, how long are you gonna keep me here? But there's something about knowing who your people are. In the Black Catholic community, our parish is more than just a place we go to, it becomes our family. And so when we talk about our parish, we say, oh, yes, Mary belongs to my parish family. And people say, family? Y'all don't look alike. But it becomes an extension because we worship together. At funerals, because it's the essential part of who we are. And so still today, we are averaging like 1,200 people at Mass on Sunday online. Our church can't hold 1,200 people at any given time. But it's another extension of people from Topeka, Kansas, and New Orleans, and Bridgeport, Connecticut, who are online and saying, this is an amazing community, and they can't even see the fellowship because we're not doing it either. But how do we find ourselves in a way where we can continuously find ways to reach out, to connect? The small faith sharing groups are wonderful to connect with smaller groups of people, but who are all these people we go to church with on Sunday? Year before last, we had a workshop, a music workshop, and we brought a wonderful woman in from Washington, D.C. And what she said is that in her ministry, she needs to know what the people are going through so she can feed them. And here's someone at the front at the piano, but she has to hear the stories of the people. And she said what she listens to, because there at her church, they do spontaneous prayers of the faithful. She listens intently. And sometimes the song has to change based upon what people are going through. And what happens when a parish community is so in tune with the community that we're just there? I often tell people that you could close your eyes and ask a room of people, when was the last time they were ministered to? And if it was by their priest, raise their hand. And for sure, and then we say, if you've been ministered to by someone else, the rest of the room will raise their hands. In our baptism, we were baptized priest, prophet, and king. And even living out that baptismal call each and every day, we know that we are called to minister to God's people. No, we may not have a little plastic in our shirt to remind us who we are. But by living, that living and breathing example of saying that, yes, I can go beyond myself, to see the needs, to hear the needs, but also to act upon the needs. That becomes our work as church. I see all of you, and you all hear me. I don't hear you, but you all hear me. But if we're really going to be church, we need to not only see, but we need to hear. And on the hearing, in that journey of hearing, we're sitting, we're walking with you, we're understanding you. So one day I hope that we can say that we will build a house where love can dwell and all can safely live. That all are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place. Thank you. No idea how we take questions from Zoom, but for sure we can take it from the room if you guys have any questions. Or statements, anything, they all work. Or if we're just tired, it's all right, I understand. We were shoveling snow this morning, trying to get out.
I do have a question. I sing, and All Are Welcome is one of the songs that I like to sing, but I totally agree with you that if we don't mean it, what good is it?
Mhm.
And I know there are some churches that I've been told do not allow that song
I'm sorry, it's me. So no.
Not everyone is welcome, and that's so frustrating that they are told their music ministry they can't. So it's not really a question, but it's just frustrating.
Yes. And, you know, I think that the vision is there. And so I like that part of the line where it says our dreams and visions. But I think that we also have to be about the work. And it's more than just being the choir, because, you know, everybody turns around and says, amen, choir, and they're like, oh, yeah. But it becomes all of our work. If we're really going to live what we believe, we have to walk the walk. We have to talk the talk. My father used to tell me that all the time. La, 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 la. I sit here and come back like, oh, here we go again. But, you know, it's essential to who we are and where we're called to go.
What is your spiritual practice to keep turning? Because I think in some of our efforts this last year, we've tried to get to a space of dis-ease. And honestly, as whites, from speaking for myself, I'm horrid at it. And so there's these silences and passive aggressive things. And then when I get into this role where I know I might actually be part of the work in progress, my faith just starts to go wobbly. And do you have a spiritual practice you can share, or is it simply just let it keep being wobbly and keep turning?
You want to know, look, God, who am I going to answer this as? Look, that's all I was going to say. How am I going to answer this question? And look, I'm going to turn this off because these lights are getting on my nerves. As a Black man, I'm probably uncomfortable probably 50% of the time. And it's nothing that any one person did, but mostly, I'll preface it, as a Black Catholic man, I go to lots of places where I'm the only one when I walk in the room. And so, you know, I kind of build myself up like, yes, we know what we're here for. Here we go. So we go in the room and I always find love, except for one place. I was in Florida giving a talk for the bishops, and I was passing out a handout, and a woman walked up, and I was like, here, and she spit in my face. And I was like, oh, and then I'm like, oh, I'm working for the bishops. You don't hit somebody, you don't swing, you just stand there and you're like, okay, this is the test, Jesus. But even in that moment where I thought I was gonna lose it, I didn't. They were like, do you want to stop your talk? We can come back tomorrow. I'm like, no, let me wash my face. I'll be right back. Because what I found is that the mission is more important than my feeling. And I know that when I started on this journey to start talking about racism, that it was going to be a rough go. And that in doing it, I was going to box myself in. Luckily, I had the music, so other people were like, oh, can you come sing at my church? I'm like, sure. But I found a way that I boxed myself in. But over and over again, the mission was more than the work. Now, as a white person, I said, you have to let that uncomfortable happen. It needs to happen naturally. There's nothing wrong with silence. But our Americanism tells us that silence is wrong. But yet the church says we need sacred silence. What is that about? Because if something is silent, that means somebody ain't doing their task. Why didn't that person get up to the microphone? Why are we sitting here? But we need to let that happen. Sometimes in the midst of these heavy conversations, we need to just sit and let it be. Not that that silence is the end, not that they have walked away or given up, but sometimes that silence needs to happen for us to process what we've heard. Sometimes the things that we have to process aren't comfortable for us. It's a challenge for us, but it's a reminder to us that there are still things for us to do. There are some flashcards that are available, and they're called What Stands Between Us. And they are available on this website called Stir Fry Seminars. And I'll make sure I make that available. But these questions are questions that people of color would ask white people, and questions that white people would ask people of color. But it opens that doorway to start those conversations. You know, the conversation we've always wanted to say, like, oh, I was at a conference and the question was asked of somebody, what's so great about being white? And it was awkward for a minute. And then the guy said, well, you know, that I can go into a store and not be looked at like I was gonna steal something. Or that I can buy a house in any neighborhood that I want to and not ever have a second thought. Or that I can go in and get a mortgage, no matter what my credit score. Then he looked and he asked a woman, what's so great about being Black? She said, oh, our food. She said, we put love in our food. And she said, and my people's hips. And I thought, oh, here we go. And she went on, and then the man said, stop. And the man said, look, he said, what? He said, you duped me. He said, what did I do? He said, you asked her what was great about being African American. He said, well, I asked you what was great about being white, because you said you were white. And he said, well, I didn't want to be white. I'm Italian. And you didn't ask me what was great about being Italian. So sometimes we have to say what we mean and mean what we say. But it's hard on the journey because we don't know what to say sometimes. But when these conversations happen, they become our truths. That when we create a space that's safe for these conversations, so you can't just go in the grocery store and be like, hey, what you think about slavery? No, that's not the place to do it. But we have to create these safe spaces. And in doing so, we have to make sure that the audience that comes into the safe space conversation, that they're diverse. Diverse ethnically, it could be diverse financially, diverse based upon where we live, because it is when we own our truths and can live that truth out that we can start to have real conversations. I think the work that you all are doing with the series that you're about to start from Just Faith is so powerful because it gets to the heart of our issues as a country, but it also sends us to where we want to see ourselves, where we want to be church, where we want to look like in the next 5 to 10 years. It's because that's where church really happens. All the things of worship are great, but my pastor says church begins when you walk out that door. When he says, go in peace. That's where church really is. And when we can get that right in the doors so that we can take it outside, then our lives will never be the same. They will be transformed on every side because I won't see you as, oh, that's Sue, my white sister. No, that's Sue. And Sue, then you'll be able to come on into my kitchen. Because in the Black community, when you're able to go into the kitchen, that's where the love happens. So when somebody invites you in the kitchen, you know you done made it. Come on in, baby, okay? But this is where we need to be. If we're gonna have authentic relationships in church, we have to start building them now so that everyone can feel valued and all are welcome. That's what it's about. So don't be scared. Don't give up. We got to keep pressing. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, is there any discussion saying the truth?
Hey, we're fancy. Thanks, Bobby.
Detroit about reparations. I mean, I'm rather impressed with, say, the Jesuits at Georgetown, what they were doing. And, you know, it's an ugly story to have to bring back up, but you can, to some degree, make things right. I was just wondering where they are on something like that. Is it on the radar? Is it?
It's on the radar. It is. In Detroit, they formed, in our last election, they cleared a way to form a reparations task force. And the task force is going to be put together before the end of this month. And then they'll start working on that, but we don't know what that will look like. City council had to give budget money for the task force, but now the work of the task force will begin. So we're waiting to see what will yield from that.
Yeah, that's the city of Detroit. What about the archdiocese? That's what I was asking.
Well, as I said, I am not speaking this evening on behalf of the Archdiocese of Detroit.
I'm just asking you to report, not to speak on it.
Well, look, I told you my plan was rejected because it was too radical. So yeah, I doubt it. But for sure, we know that through, I guess where we got our claim to fame for the Detroit Catholic Pastoral Alliance was in the closing of parishes in '89 and '90. And it was unfairly tilted to close many parishes that were located in the city of Detroit. Parishes that the people who were there did not build. These parishes that were huge, right, had 3,000 families at one time, and now there's a small community there of 300 people trying to maintain a big building. And instead of revisioning what that might look like in smaller communities as the church began, we closed parishes. And so it was very hurtful, especially for the Black Catholic community. I know hundreds upon hundreds of former Catholics, former Black Catholics, and many of them have left as a result of those church closings, because what it really did, as I said, it ripped the family apart. You know, it wasn't just the people I go to church with. No, this was my family, and it changed that whole outlook of what that looked like. And so we did have a massive pardon in our diocese, and we had our only Black deacon apologize for the sin of racism, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. But it happened, and here we are.
We have a Zoom question. Rebecca asked, what are ways in which your students and the young people you work with inspire you?
Okay, great, here we go. Well, this semester, last year, I'll say this out loud because I don't think anybody from the school is going to see it. I renamed my course. So last year, with everything that was going on, and after I got over COVID, I'm like, oh, we got to change this course up. Because the impetus of the course was not only to study a religious practice that wasn't your own within the Christian denominations, but then to go and visit and experience. So we talk about all these aspects that form, and then you go and visit, and that becomes part of your final exam. And with the things that were going on in the world, I said, oh, I could change my name, my course, and nobody knew it. And nobody knew it. I put out a new syllabus, and I said, the spirituality of Black Lives Matter. And the kids came and they're like, oh, cool. And the parents started writing like, this is amazing. Where'd you come up with this from? And I was like, oh yeah, we're still forming the course. Your kids are going through it for the first time. But this year, it's weird because I have a full-time job, or 3, and I can't say no. But at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're not very talkative. And this year, this class I have, they come in and they are on it. And they amaze me at the depth of the conversation at 8 o'clock in the morning. This class is just starting. And last week we started with an analysis of racism, and they blew me out of the water every day. I kept saying, man, if this is like this for the whole semester, I'm gonna love this class. And so they continue to inspire me because they want more. This is the first year that I've had 5 white students in my class. But for the first 3 years, it was all Black. I was like, well, this is no challenge, but they're entering into the conversation. They allow themselves to be uncomfortable so that they can understand where everybody's coming from. And it's just been amazing. And we've only had a whole week under our belt. So yes. There was one over here. I don't know. Yes.
Thanks, Father. I didn't mean to make you walk all the way over here just for, I just wanted to say that I appreciate your enthusiasm and your authenticity. It's been a wonderful evening, but I'm also dying to know what parish you're at.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm at Sacred Heart Church in Detroit. It's really right off the freeway. You can come visit anytime. It's right at I-75 at Mac. And the remnant of St. Peter Claver, which was the first Black Catholic parish in actually in the state of Michigan. And it started out at St. Mary's School in Greektown. If you ever come to Detroit and go to the casino, yeah, there we go, right there. But the Blacks weren't allowed in the church. And just the whole history of what was going on at the time. And so they allowed them a classroom. And within 2 weeks, the classroom was too small. And so the pastor allowed them to bust a hole in the classroom. And so there was a hole, not two whole rooms, but you could look through, see the altar, and mass was held there until that space became too small. And there was an old Episcopal church not far, right by I-75 in Mac, that the diocese purchased, and it became St. Peter Claver. And the Spiritan fathers or Holy Ghost fathers ran both parishes for a long time until it became a diocese parish. When they finally pulled out of Sacred Heart and just stayed at St. Mary's because of the numbers of priests. But it's just an amazing history to see it. So we invite you to come on down. Our pastor is 91 and he has just as much energy as me because he has 2 churches and he keeps it going. So it's a blessing. So we always invite you.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna just,
Close it out.
if people have questions, they can come forward, obviously, but when I met you upstairs, John, I said that we're so blessed to have you here in our little church, and I'm so excited that you brought family with. And I said that because I Googled, you can find out a lot about Google. And I kind of got to know your life, and I just was really looking forward to meeting you because you've been the true disciple of Jesus Christ for your whole life. And that's why you're involved in the work you do. We all pray, and how often we pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And I was asked to give a prayer for International Samaritan Board meeting last weekend, which was Martin Luther King weekend. And I started to do some research, and I found a prayer that he wrote in 1957. And that was the prayer I used. And I found myself disheartened a little bit, saying, my Lord, that was 1 year before I was born, and the words are so true today. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't think we've made much progress. So when you talked about your 15-year-old son, I got emotional because, you know, we do what we do because we walk with Christ. And Christ walked through his whole ministry to those who were marginalized, those who were oppressed, and said, you're beautiful, you're a child of God. But I find myself thinking, you just evoked this, I think, in all of us. I have more faith tonight, I have more hope, and I have more willingness to keep on loving. So thank you so much for being with us at St. Mary's Student Parish. God bless.